You're dead weight in this house, old man. My wife feels the same way. She just won't say it to your face. My son-in-law said that to me on a Tuesday evening while my daughter stood in the kitchen doorway and said nothing. Not one word. I looked at her. She looked at her shoes. I nodded once, walked to my room, and closed the door quietly behind me. 3 days later, I was gone, and I took $9 million with me. Before we get into what happened next, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you're watching from. It means more than you know. The folder from my cardiologist sat on the passenger seat the afternoon everything started moving in a direction I'd been quietly dreading. Mild atrial fibrillation, manageable with medication and a low-stress environment. The doctor had actually smiled when she said it, like she was delivering good news wrapped in a warning. I was 64. I'd spent 35 years as an aerospace engineer, then another decade consulting, then sold 2 patents to a defense contractor for more money than I ever expected to see. You'd think I'd have learned by then that good news and warnings rarely cancel each other out. I drove from the clinic in Plano back toward Frisco, toward the house my daughter and her husband owned. The house I'd helped them buy 4 years ago, with what I told them was my entire savings from selling the patents. I told them I'd gotten $400,000 after taxes. The actual number was considerably different, but I'll get to that. My daughter, Renee, was 36. She'd married her husband, Craig, 8 years ago, in a ceremony I paid for without complaint. Craig worked in commercial real estate, carried himself like a man who believed his own press releases, and had the handshake of someone who practiced it in the mirror. He was not a bad person. Exactly. He was just the kind of person who sorted everyone in the world into 2 categories: useful and decorative. For the first 2 years I lived in their house, I was useful. I paid $2,500 a month toward the household expenses, fixed things that broke, picked up their son from school 3 days a week, and stayed out of the way. By year 3, I had apparently been reclassified. It started small. Craig stopped making eye contact during dinner. Renee began answering my questions with the precise minimum number of words. My grandson, Tyler, 8 years old with his mother's eyes and his father's unfortunate habit of repeating things he'd overheard, stopped running to the door when I came home. The warmth had been replaced by something polite and hollow, like a hotel lobby. I noticed. I'd been noticing for months. But I'm a patient man. I come from a long line of people who don't speak until they're ready to be heard. So I watched, and I waited, and I kept paying my $2,500 every month in cash, the same way I always had. The night Craig said what he said, I'd come home from my cardiology appointment and found him in the living room watching television with the particular posture of a man who had already decided something. Renee was in the kitchen. Tyler was upstairs. Craig muted the TV when I walked in, which should have told me something right there. Craig never muted anything voluntarily. He said he and Renee had been talking. He said the house felt crowded. He said, and I am quoting precisely here, that having a third adult in the space was putting strain on their marriage. Then he paused, looked at me with the expression of a man who had rehearsed this speech and found it satisfying, and said the thing about dead weight. I turned to look at my daughter. She was still standing in the kitchen doorway. Her hands were wrapped around a dish towel she'd been drying for what looked like several minutes without actually drying anything. She did not look at me. She looked at the floor between us, and she said nothing. There was a moment, about 3 seconds long, where I considered saying something. I had the words ready. I'd earned the right to say them, but I looked at my daughter's face, the way it had gone careful and blank, the way it used to when she was 12 and waiting to see if I'd be angry about something she'd done, and I understood that she already knew she was wrong. She just wasn't brave enough to stop it. I said, I understand. That was all. 2 words. I walked to my room. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark and did the arithmetic I'd been quietly doing for 4 years. The $50,000 I'd given them for the down payment on this house. The $25,000 for the kitchen renovation the year after. The $2,500 every single month for 4 years. The $12,000 for the car Craig had needed when his lease expired, and he was, he said, temporarily cash-strapped. The $8,000 for Tyler's private school enrollment fee they'd been unable to cover. Total it up. It was a significant number. and every dollar of it had come from a man they'd just called dead weight. I opened the banking app on my phone at 2 in the morning. The account balance stared back at me. $9,241,088, give or take the daily interest. They thought I'd gotten $400,000 from selling the patents. The actual sale had closed at $7.2 million. Between that and the investments I'd been quietly building for 15 years before the sale, the compounded index funds and the municipal bonds and one very well-timed tech position my old colleague Raymond had talked me into, I had never been anywhere close to needing their roof over my head. I had chosen it. I had chosen them. I lay in the dark and remembered why. 4 years ago, Renee had called me crying. She'd said Craig had found the perfect house in Frisco, good school district for Tyler, room to grow, but they were short on the down payment and the mortgage would be tight for the first few years. She hadn't asked for money. She'd just been telling me about her life, the way she used to when she was young, and I was the person she turned to with things. I'd offered. I'd wanted to be needed. I'd wanted to know if the need was real. Now I had my answer. I was showered and dressed before anyone else was awake. I made coffee, drank it, standing at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard where Tyler's bicycle leaned against the fence, the training wheels still attached even though he no longer needed them. I set my mug in the sink, walked back to my room, and called a number I hadn't dialed in 3 years. Raymond, my oldest friend, a retired contractor who had moved to Austin and spent his days fishing and being right about things. "It's early," Raymond said when he answered. "I'm moving," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "When?" "Soon. I need a real estate agent in the Frisco-McKinney area, someone discreet. I'll make some calls." By the time Craig came downstairs at 7:15, I had already spoken to an agent named Sandra Polk, who had an available showing at 2 o'clock. I was at the kitchen table reading the news on my phone. Craig poured himself coffee without looking at me, which saved us both the discomfort of acknowledging the previous evening. Renee came down at 7:30, saw me at the table, opened her mouth, closed it again, and began making Tyler's breakfast with the focused attention of a woman who had decided that productivity was the same as innocence. I left for my showing at 1:30 without telling either of them where I was going. Sandra Polk was a small, efficient woman in her 50s who had the handshake of someone who had closed a great many deals and intended to close several more. She showed me 4 properties. The first 3 were fine. The 4th was where I stopped walking halfway through the tour of the backyard and told her I wanted to make an offer. It was a single-story house on a quiet street in McKinney. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a home office with built-in shelving, a covered patio overlooking a yard with 2 old oak trees that had clearly been there longer than the neighborhood. The kitchen was updated. The primary bedroom had good light. It was 15 minutes from Tyler's school, which was not relevant to any plan I'd made, but which I noticed anyway. "The sellers are motivated," Sandra said. "They relocated to Denver 6 weeks ago. The house has been empty." "Cash offer," I said. "Full asking price." Her professional composure held, but just barely. "When would you like to close?" "As quickly as the title company can manage." That evening I called my financial advisor, a man named Howard, whom I'd trusted for 20 years, and arranged the transfer. Then I called a law firm I'd worked with when the patent sale closed. I asked for an attorney named Margaret Voss, who had the particular quality of being simultaneously thorough and unsentimental. She had drawn up certain documents for me 4 years ago, on the same day I'd written the check for Renee and Craig's down payment. Documents that Craig had signed without reading, because Craig was the kind of man who signed things without reading them when the alternative was appearing ungrateful. Margaret answered on the second ring. "Walter, it's been a while. I'll need to update some estate documents," I said, "and I'll need you to review that promissory note from 4 years ago." She was quiet for a moment with a specific quality that experienced attorneys develop, the silence of someone assembling a picture. "I see. Do you want to discuss enforcement?" "Not yet. Let me get settled first." I spent the next week moving with the systematic efficiency of a man who had never fully unpacked in 4 years. I hadn't, actually. Some part of me had always known that this house was not mine, that the arrangements was provisional, that the test I was running would eventually reach its conclusion. My boxes were organized. My files were already labeled. The movers I'd hired arrived at 8 on a Thursday morning. The same morning, Craig drove to his office and Renee took Tyler to school. I'd left a note on the kitchen counter the night before. Thank you for the 4 years of hospitality. I've found my own place and will be moved out before noon. This month's contribution is in the envelope on the table. I wish you well, Dad. The phrase Dad had given me a long moment of pause. I had written it and looked at it for a full minute before deciding to leave it. It was accurate. It was also, I thought, the kind of word that would land differently on Renee than anything else I could have written. I tipped the movers generously and watched the truck pull away from my new address at 11:45. I stood in my new living room with its high ceilings and clean light coming through the windows onto floors that hadn't been scuffed yet by anyone else's life. I made coffee in my new kitchen. I took it out to the patio and sat under one of the oak trees and did not feel sad, exactly. I felt clear. My phone showed 4 missed calls from Renee by 2 in the afternoon. I didn't answer. 2 texts followed. The first said, "Dad, where are you? We came home and your things are gone." The second said, "Please call me. I'm worried." I read them and set the phone face down on the patio table. I was worried too, in a way, but not about anything she was thinking about. The call I'd been waiting for happened 10 days later. Margaret Voss called me on a Wednesday morning while I was in my home office, reviewing the investment statements I'd had forwarded to my new address. Her voice was measured, professional, carrying the specific neutrality of someone about to describe a significant reaction. "I met with your daughter and her husband yesterday," she said. "Per your instructions, I showed them the portfolio statements and the documentation from the patent sale. How did it go? Your son-in-law left the conference table twice. Once to get water. I believe the second time was to collect himself. The portfolio statement Margaret had shown them was current. It showed $9,241,088 in investment accounts alone, not counting the new house, not counting the vehicle I'd purchased outright, not counting a dozen smaller assets. The patent sale documentation showed the actual closing figure, $7.2 million, not the $400,000 I'd told them about 4 years ago. Margaret had also shown them the promissory note. 4 years ago, on the same day I wrote the down payment check, I had slid a separate document across my kitchen table to Craig. I told him it was standard acknowledgement paperwork, something my accountant required for gifts above a certain dollar amount for tax purposes. Craig had nodded with the confidence of a man who understood financial matters and signed it without reading past the first paragraph. What he signed was a promissory note for $95,000. The down payment, the kitchen renovation, the car, the school enrollment fee, all of it itemized and totaled at 4% annual interest, with a 5-year term and an acceleration clause that allowed me to call the full balance due at any time. The interest had been accruing for 4 years. Total amount due, per Margaret's calculation, $112,400. Renee called that evening. I let it ring. Craig called the following morning. I let that ring too. I changed my cell number on the 3rd day and gave the new number only to Raymond, to Margaret, and to my sister Eleanor in Cincinnati. I kept the old phone powered on and face up on my desk like evidence. By the end of the first week, the old phone had accumulated 31 missed calls. The texts ranged from, "Dad, please just tell us you're okay," to, "Walter, this has gone far enough." "Call me too," from Craig, a long message that began with an apology and ended with the word "unreasonable," which told me everything I needed to know about how the apology had been meant. Margaret called to tell me they had consulted a family law attorney about contesting the promissory note. The attorney had informed them that a competent adult who signs a document is bound by it, regardless of what they were told it was, and that in Texas, there was no legal basis to challenge enforcement. The family law attorney had also, apparently, gently inquired about whether Craig had actually read the document before signing. Craig had said he had. The attorney had not pursued that line any further. Margaret also told me something else. "They're leveraged against the house," she said. "Between their mortgage and a home equity line they took out last year, they have limited options for producing the full amount quickly. How much savings do they have?" She paused. Their attorney disclosed approximately $18,000. I sat with that number for a moment. 18,000 against 112,000. Craig had been pulling a salary of $140,000 a year for 8 years, and they had $18,000 in savings. I thought about what that meant. The cars, the vacations, the renovation budgets, The private school, the gym memberships and restaurant meals, and the particular lifestyle of people who believe that wealth and the appearance of wealth are interchangeable. The certified letter from Margaret's office arrived at their house on a Friday. I knew this because Craig texted my old number at 9:45 that morning, a text that was entirely capitalized and contained 3 factual errors and 1 complete sentence that I thought, under different circumstances, might have been worth framing. Renee texted an hour later. Her message was shorter. It said, "How could you do this to your own daughter?" I read it several times. Then I put the old phone back on my desk and went to water my garden. Tyler called on a Sunday afternoon, 9 days after the letter arrived. He'd gotten my new number from somewhere, possibly from a card he'd found in his mother's things, possibly from Renee herself, possibly from the particular determination of an 8-year-old who has decided to get something done. His voice was small and careful in the way of children who have overheard conversations they weren't supposed to hear. "Grandpa Walt," he said, "are you mad at us?" I set down the book I was reading. "No, buddy, I'm not mad at you. Dad says you took our money." I was quiet for a moment. "Your dad and I had an agreement about some money I lent them. That's between the grown-ups. Mom cries at night sometimes." He said it matter-of-factly, the way children report facts that sit too heavy for them to carry alone. I heard her. "I know this is hard," I said. "None of this is your fault. Not one bit of it. Will you come to my baseball game? It's on Saturday." I closed my eyes. "I'll try, buddy. I'll do my best." After he hung up, I sat in my home office for 20 minutes doing nothing. Then I called Margaret. "They haven't made contact through proper channels," she said. "Just the informal attempts to reach you directly. How's their timeline looking?" 90 days from the demand letter puts them at the end of next month. They've sold some things, apparently. Some furniture. A watch Craig was apparently very attached to. They've approached 2 lenders about a second mortgage and been declined because of the existing encumbrance. At current pace, they'll have perhaps $35,000 by the deadline. I looked out my office window at the oak trees in my backyard, the light coming through them in the late afternoon the way it does in Texas in the fall, golden and slanted and somehow already nostalgic. Has there been any genuine acknowledgement? Not the panic, not the crisis management. Something real? Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Renee sent a letter to my office last week, not through her attorney. Personal stationery, handwritten. Would you like me to read it to you?" "Please." It was 3 pages. Margaret read it in the steady, unadorned way of someone who respects the weight of what they're carrying. Renee had written about the night Craig said what he said. She had written that she stood in the kitchen doorway and said nothing, and that she had not been able to stop thinking about it since the morning she came home to find my note on the counter. She wrote that she had spent years letting Craig become the loudest voice in decisions that should have been hers to make. She wrote that she knew the money was not the point, and that she was ashamed it had taken losing it to understand that. She wrote that she missed me with a specific, particular grief that she hadn't expected. The grief of someone who has broken something that cannot be unbought by any amount of regret. At the end, she wrote, "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't think I've earned that yet. I'm asking you to know that I understand what I did, and that I am more sorry than I can make you believe right now. You deserved better from me. You always did." Margaret finished reading and let the silence sit. "Keep the letter," I said finally. 3 weeks before the deadline, Renee came to my house. I saw her car on the street from my front window, a practical sedan she'd started driving after Craig's lease car went back. She sat outside for 10 minutes before she came to the door. I watched her walk up the path, take in the house, the yard, the gate, the modest but unmistakable markers of a life that did not require anyone's permission or hospitality. I met her at the door before she could ring the bell. She looked thinner. She also looked more like herself than she had in years, more like the daughter I'd driven to college and watched walk across a stage and danced with at a wedding. Less like the curated version of herself that she'd been performing since she married a man who preferred the performance to the person. "I didn't call first," she said. "I'm sorry. Come in." We sat in my living room. I made coffee. She wrapped her hands around the mug the way she had since she was a teenager, both hands, like it was something to hold on to. She didn't look around the house in the way of someone cataloging assets. She looked at me. "Craig didn't come," she said. "I noticed. He wanted to. I asked him not to. She looked down at her coffee. Some of this conversation is between you and me, not us. I waited. I knew about the household money, she said. He thought we should be getting more. He never said it directly to me, but I knew. And I let him think it. I let him think you were a burden we were being generous to carry, because it was easier than telling him he was wrong. She looked up. You weren't a burden. You were my father, and I treated you like a problem to be managed. Yes, I said. You did. She flinched slightly. I hadn't softened it, and I didn't intend to. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because the truth, without softening, was the only thing that would mean anything. I can't pay the full amount, she said. You know that. We've tried. We have $38,000. I know what you have. Are you going to take the house? I looked at my daughter. She was afraid in the way of someone who has been afraid for weeks and has run out of ways to hide it. I thought about the 8-year-old who had called me on a Sunday afternoon. I thought about the letter Margaret had read to me. I thought about the note I had left on their kitchen counter that said Dad at the bottom, the word I had almost crossed out and hadn't. That depends, I said, on what you're willing to do. I pulled a folder from the side table beside my chair. I slid it across the coffee table. These are my terms, non-negotiable, all of them. She opened the folder and read. I watched her face. There were 5 terms. First, she and Craig would pay me the $38,000 they had assembled, and I would forgive the remaining balance. The debt would end there, entirely. Second, Craig would write a formal, specific apology, not a general one, addressing what he said to me directly, in his own words, without revision from Renee or from any attorney. Third, the 2 of them would attend couples counseling for a minimum of 6 months, not for my benefit, but for Tyler's. Fourth, my will would be revised. The bulk of my estate would go to a charitable foundation and to a trust for Tyler, accessible when he turned 25. Renee and Craig would receive, combined, $75,000 from an estate of just over $9 million. Fifth, Tyler and I would have standing Saturday morning time together. No exceptions, no cancellations except illness, not scheduling conflicts or plans that came up. Renee read it twice. When she looked up, her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. The will, she said. The $75,000. That's correct. Out of $9 million. Out of $9 million. Yes. She nodded slowly, the nod of someone accepting something they know they have no standing to dispute. That's fair, she said quietly. I think that's actually fair. I know it is. Craig will have to be told about the estate change. Craig can have whatever reaction he chooses. His reaction won't change the terms. She looked at the last item on the list. Saturday mornings with Tyler. Every week. She pressed her lips together. For a moment I thought she was going to cry, in earnest. Instead, she straightened slightly, set down the folder, and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face in several years. It was the expression of someone deciding to be honest even when it cost them something. I'm afraid you won't forgive us, she said. Really forgive us. I'm afraid we'll follow every term and pay everything and do the counseling, and you'll still never look at me the way you used to. I don't know if I will, I said. That's the truth. What I can tell you is that I'm not interested in punishing you forever. I'm interested in knowing whether you're the person I raised or the person you've been for the last several years. The terms give you a way to show me. What happens after that depends on what you show me. We sat for a while without speaking. Outside, through the front window, I could see the late afternoon light on the oak trees. The same light I'd been watching every evening since I moved in, learning to belong to it. 48 hours to decide, I said. Both of you. Renee nodded. She stood, and I walked her to the door. And we stood for a moment on the threshold between my house and the outside world, the same threshold I had crossed in the other direction a lifetime ago, in a way that felt like it was over and wasn't, because nothing is ever as over as it looks when you're standing in the middle of it. Dad, she said, I waited. I love you. I should have said that instead of nothing. That night. Yes, I said. You should have. She walked to her car. I went back inside and sat in my home office and looked at the 2 photographs on my desk. One was Tyler at 6, sitting on my lap while I read him something, both of us looking at the book instead of the camera. The other was Renee at 12, standing beside me at a county fair, holding a ribbon she'd won for something I can no longer remember, and looking up at me like I was the most reliable thing in her world. I opened my laptop. I had a mentoring session the following morning with a young woman who was starting an engineering consultancy and needed help structuring her first partnership agreement. I had a garden that needed attention. I had a house that was mine, entirely mine. Every doorknob and cabinet and patio chair acquired by my own hand and no one else's. My phone buzzed. A text from Tyler's number, which could only mean he had borrowed his mother's phone or found a way to send messages I didn't know about. "Grandpa Walt, are you coming Saturday?" I looked at the message for a long moment. "I'll be there," I wrote back. Craig's written apology arrived at Margaret's office 4 days later. It was a single page. It did not contain the word unreasonable anywhere in it. It named what he had said, specifically, without hedging. It said he had treated a man who had given him nothing but generosity, as though generosity were a transaction he'd had the right to audit and find insufficient. It said he had been wrong in a way that he was still understanding the dimensions of. It was not eloquent, but it was honest, and honesty, at this point, was considerably more useful than eloquence. Margaret sent me a scan. I read it once, filed it, and didn't read it again. That was enough. The counseling started the following month. I know this because Tyler mentioned it on a Saturday morning over pancakes at the diner 3 blocks from my house, the one he had already decided was our place, where the waitress already knew to bring him chocolate milk without being asked. "Mom and Dad go talk to a lady on Thursdays," he said, arranging his pancakes with the seriousness of a small architect. "I don't have to go." "That's right. You don't. Is it because of the money stuff?" I looked at my grandson across the table. He had Craig's jawline and Renee's eyes, and something entirely his own in the way he asked questions, direct and patient at the same time, like he genuinely wanted to understand and was willing to wait for the answer. "It's because sometimes grown-ups need help learning how to talk to each other better," I said. The money stuff was part of it, but it's bigger than that. He considered this. "Are you and Mom okay now? We're working on it." "Working on it" is the honest answer. He nodded, apparently satisfied with that, and returned to his pancakes. I sat across from him in the diner, with the Saturday morning light coming through the windows, and the comfortable noise of other people's breakfasts around us, and I felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for longer than 4 years. Not resolution exactly, not forgiveness exactly, something more provisional and more honest than either of those words. The beginning of seeing whether the people I loved could become the people I needed them to be. The willingness to watch and wait and not assume the answer before the evidence was in. I had spent 4 years playing a role in someone else's house to learn something I could not have learned any other way. I had made myself smaller to measure whether they would notice, whether they would ask me to take up more space, whether they were capable of wanting me for reasons that had nothing to do with what I could write a check for. They had failed that test, completely, clearly, without ambiguity. But failure is not the same as permanent. I had not built a business from nothing, sold it for more than I ever expected, watched my money grow for 2 decades through careful and patient attention, simply to spend the years I had left in a posture of punishment toward people who were capable of being better than they had been. That was not who I was. It was not what I was interested in. The will stood as written. The terms remained non-negotiable. The trust for Tyler would be there when he was 25, and ready for it, insulated from any financial decisions his parents might make in the meantime. Those things would not change. But on Saturday mornings, in a diner 3 blocks from my house that Tyler had already claimed as ours, I sat across from my grandson and ordered coffee and watched him eat his pancakes with the focused pleasure of a child who does not yet know that anything in his world is fragile, and I decided that this was enough for now. Not everything. Not forgiveness on demand. Not the return of anything that had been broken. But this, right here, at this table, in this light, with this child looking up at me like I was someone he was glad to know. This was mine. I had earned it, and no one was going to take it from me again. If this story meant something to you, please hit the like button and subscribe to Honest Revenge Stories. Leave a comment and tell me what you think Renee should have done differently from the beginning. I read every single one. And if you want to hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for being here.